Exactly 5:30. Good evening to all those who have joined. And hopefully, we all remember what we had read last week. If there is anybody who would like to share a thought before I start reading, you're most welcome to do so. And then we will start with today's reading. So, if there's anybody, please raise your hand and then you can unmute yourself and speak. So, if there's anyone who wants to share a thought about what we had read last time or anything that is connected to what we're doing, just do that quickly and then we will go on to the reading today's portion of the reading. Okay, so I don't see any hands that are raised, but I must tell you all that the last week's session, the way it ended, was very inspiring, and it was quite a motivation to see that the ladies from Educate Girls, were part of our meeting, and we were able to meet them also, and they were able to hear the stories that they have themselves created. So that was a wonderful thing to have happened last week. And I shall start with where we had stopped. It is as Rohini has rightly pointed out, we will start with the world today. Education is the key to the empowerment and growth of individuals, societies, nations, and to the health of the planet. When in late 2023, Educate Girls turned 16, I decided to go back to Pali and visit Vibha to see where life had taken her. We were deep in rural Rajasthan in her village, and as we sat together, the late morning January sun was warm on our faces. How had life changed for that bubbly, smiling 9-year-old girl who back in 2008 thought accompanying her brother on the cycle or playing outside the school building was equivalent to going to school? All those years ago, we had worked day and night to convince Dinesh, Vibha's father, to enroll her in school. So, did she stay enrolled? Did education change her own circumstances and that of her family? Did Dinesh still believe that only boys should be educated? My father believes in education now. Vibha looked over at her father and smiled. After I went to a bridge course and then KGBV to complete my 10th, I was able to continue to 12th and finish school. Back in 2008, things were different. Before the RTE Act came fully into force, there was no way for a 9-year-old to enroll in the mainstream primary school after having missed the first 4 years of education. So the government had launched what were known as bridge courses to deliver an intensive catch up curriculum and enable children who had never enrolled to go to school. Vibha recalled with joy her experiences in the course. It was a huge wrench for her and her sisters to be sent away for 6 months to a residential facility. They missed their parents, but what the course opened up whole new world to Vibha, one she appreciates so deeply now as she goes about her work. After the bridge course, she and her sister enrolled in the Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalay, that is the KGBV, which we read about earlier. The KGBV program had been initiated by the central government in 2004 to provide residential schools for girls from minority backgrounds, those who were orphaned, whose parents had migrated for work, or had difficult circumstances at home. If there wasn't a primary school nearby, which was often the case in remote rural India before the RTE Act called for an infrastructure drive that mandated that there should be a primary school within 1 kilometer of every household, then the KGBV was often the best option. Now, in her early 20s, Vibha was a petite young woman dressed in a soft cream and red colored sari, a warm jacket, and a gold trimmed translucent dupatta that had fallen from her head and was draped over her shoulder. Vibha explained with relish the opportunity she had had at the KGBV to visit Mount Abu on a school trip. As we continued to chat, she drew breath about to go on when Dinesh jumped in. The world today is built for the educated, he declared dramatically. A profound statement from the proud and eloquent man who sat opposite me on a black molded plastic chair in his immaculate courtyard. To our left, through the boundary wall gate, the comings and goings of the village were visible. To our right was Dinesh's simple but attractive 2 room whitewashed bungalow, a brick built pakka home to a family of 7 children. The family had now shrunk with the passing of time as the children stepped out into the world with families, lives of their own, and with their education. And Dinesh paused dramatically. I only know this because I am educated, he continued, with a proud emphasis on the I. The uneducated will have no place in this world. And if you are uneducated, you will be exploited like animals. Just as he said this, a herd of goats passed by the courtyard gate, their discordant bells jangling, and Dinesh nodded in their direction with a knowing look. His allusion was not lost on me. He is retired now and has a small strip of land that he farms just behind the house. He also looks after the vacant properties of the families from the village who have migrated to Udaipur or Mumbai. Just a quick explanation of the word illusion. Illusion is not illusion. Please understand the distinction between the two words. Illusion is a reference to something that has happened in another situation, to a reference to an incident from another piece of literature, etc. He also looks after the vacant properties of the families from the village who have migrated to Udaipur or Mumbai. Families who needed someone to keep an eye on their native home while they live and work full time in the city. Everyone in the village trusts Dinesh ji as a respected member of various village committees. But he was once a skilled stones mason working on the Akshardham temple in Gujarat. A skilled stone mason with a 10th pass education. I'm strong, he announced, flexing muscles that we, of course, couldn't see beneath his lilac kurta. But you could tell from his hands that he was indeed strong and had certainly worked hard. He loved to work with his hands, he told us. But as he reiterated, he was educated. Today, 15 years after we first met her, it took us a while to get to speak to Vibha herself as her energetic father held court. It was evident that a hierarchy still existed in the family. Shrouded in a red dupatta, Mamta, Vibha's mother, joined us. We all beamed and greeted her, but we could only assume she was smiling too. It wasn't until later, when we persuaded her to lift her veil, that we saw her gleaming eyes and contented face. She moved to crouch at her husband's feet until we all leapt to our feet and insisted that she sit with us on a chair. I felt for her as she sat uncomfortably, not used to the furniture. My mind wandered, and I thought about her life. When we eventually saw her smile, Mamta looked older than me, but we were likely the same age. A harsh environment and difficult life had meted out more on her face than mine. She had adult children, mine were still in their teens. I couldn't help thinking that I might have been born here. This could have been me. Dinesh's animal analogy sat somewhere uncomfortably with me, particularly as it was clear that his own wife was not an educated woman. But what he was really trying to explain was the need for education so that everyone could understand their basic human rights, rights that an animal does not have. Everyone should read the Constitution, he declared, waving his fist in the air like a revolutionary. He went on to explain to us how we all needed to know our rights because, with knowledge of our rights, we would be able to hold politicians to account, know how to vote, and make informed choices. If we don't have education, we don't know our rights, and we will be exploited like sheep or goats. And there he was again, back to the animals. This was not the conversation I had anticipated having as we visited Vibha, but it was and is a conversation that so clearly supports the unarguable premise that education is every girl's right. Dinesh has a point. The world is made for the educated, and as Nagina Banu showed us all those years ago, a little bit of education can be a matter of survival. It can be the difference between holding on to your assets and being defrauded. It can be the window to the world so that you can stand up for yourself and avoid exploitation. It is perhaps more pronounced in pockets of India, but across the world as well, we see communities living in multiple centuries in parallel. Without an education, a person is trapped in a bygone era, unable to access and benefit from the progress the 21st century has seen in terms of communication, transport, healthcare, political engagement, etc. Nations, too, are held back when a majority of their citizens are unable to read or write. A quality education can change the life of an individual and family in just one generation. Education means that you can advocate for yourself and have the agency to make the choices you want for yourself in the world. Nagina's and Dinesh's words remind me of what Nelson Mandela said: education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Despite this, globally, 133 million girls still remain out of school, on the margins. Go to the people on the margins. If you live near the crossroads or if you live near a river, you're going to be okay. But if you live on the margins, the world is going to forget about you. Hans Rosling to Melinda Gates. There is no doubt in my mind that the lack of a quality education is a barrier to the dignity of a girl living in today's world. Being denied an education is the deepest form of inequality, rendering a girl powerless and dependent. Behind every illiterate woman is a girl who is not allowed to go to school. But what I wanted to understand when I began exploring this subject was why girls were still not going to school in certain areas. What were the barriers? Who were the out of school girls and why were they being denied this basic right? It was 2007, and I started by going deeper into rural Pali with some of our first team members and asking a lot of questions. Physical margins. India is a country of 28 states and 8 union territories, including over 6,60,000 villages that are home to roughly 65% of its population. All villages are not identical, and their locations and access to them can vary dramatically. Some are close to towns and cities where progress is much more visible. Some are close to crossroads where public transport connects them to the wider world, while some are remote and inaccessible, especially if on the wrong side of the river or a hill. Physical distance to school can be the first barrier to a girl's education. The school is far was a constant refrain from all the girls and parents we met. I was in Sumerpur block where I had come to meet Ramchandra, one of our team members. The plan was to talk to girls there who were not enrolled in school. Trailing Ramchandra that day was quite an undertaking. I might have been forgiven for thinking we were on a hike off a beaten path, meandering through hills, exploring new terrain. But Ramchandra knew exactly where he was going. None of this was new to him. He was on a mission, but he also had a laid back air about him and a confidence that belied a great sense of being part of the land, native to this very place, very much at home. Once we reached the top of the hill, Ramchandra extended his arm in the direction of the sun. It took a minute or two for my eyes to adjust to the late morning glare, which bleached the sky as I tried to make out what he was showing me. The landscape was a series of undulating hills and valleys. Some were 45-degree inclines we were about to scale. Some hills had animal sheds, some had homes. They were indistinguishable to me. But Ramchandra knew everyone, all 400 families. He knew who lived where and who we needed to visit. But as far as the eye could see, there was no obvious village. This village is indeed a collection of 7 hamlets with very little that brings them together as a village. There is certainly no village hub. It lies 60 kilometers from Pali city, a 3 hour walk to the nearest medical facility to the south, and a 3 hour walk to the nearest bank to the north. A towering mobile phone mast sits bang in the middle of the arid landscape like an elongated Eiffel Tower. There are 5 to 6 hours of electricity on most days, and the fields are crisscrossed by precarious looking electricity wires. Wires that carry the charge for the phones of the village men but don't carry much for the girls. There is no running water. Cooking is done with firewood, gathered and carried by the girls. Water is hauled up from open wells, always collected by the girls. And there is one road that winds its way through the clusters of homes, a kacha road, no asphalt or cement. We were truly on the margins. It seemed a dry, barren location, underpopulated and remote. But on closer inspection, it was possible to make out individual fields, a patchwork of yellow and green discrete crops, grasses that would provide feed for livestock and wheat for bread. Much of it was parched and brown. But where the soil was good enough and irrigation possible, every part of the land had purpose. Fruit trees had sticks leaning up against them, revealing that they were regularly harvested. There was no windfall on the ground. Every fruit was put to use. As I took shelter from the scorching heat for a few moments under one such tree, Ramchandra picked up the stick and shook the tree vigorously, catching the Indian plums as they toppled and handing me a few to try. They were tart. The primary and secondary schools were near the main road, just after the crossroad as you turned left towards the village before the road turned kacha. But neither school was really in the village, and not really near where most people lived. Earlier in the day, we had driven past the schools and left the buildings behind, reaching the end of the road in perhaps 10 or 15 minutes, but that was by car. No one in this village drove or owned a car. Once the road ended, we set off on foot along paths you would be forgiven for missing, paths that didn't exist. Working backwards, school was perhaps a good hour and a half on foot from the houses we were about to visit, and I thought to myself, twice a day in the heat of the sun, that is far. In our hardy trainers and adult legs, we walked and walked. We climbed, we paused to catch our breath, and in 3 hours we covered 4 homes. I felt a similar sense of living on the margins when visiting villages near the Bandi River. One such village had more going for it than some. It was a little closer to the nearest town, but it had a river running through it. A river that shrunk in the dry months and was easy enough to cross when the boatman was there, or the farmer with his raft and paddle. It meandered rather than flowed. On occasion, it dried out to the extent that there were stepping stones. But for 3 months of the year, this river filled and flowed. There was no bridge, and there were days, many days, when the boatmen didn't go and the farmer's raft wasn't strong enough. In the monsoon, the Bandi River was a torrent. It was angry and defiant and had no empathy for the families who lived on the wrong side. On the wrong side, you didn't and couldn't go to school. This was another village on the margins. There is no denying it was also a challenge for the boys to go to school in these villages. But parents were less worried about the journey when it came to their sons. If it was far, they could cope. The monsoon waters were sometimes insurmountable for boys and girls. But the distance was worse for girls. It really was. They would have likely walked the same distance already before school to fetch water, and the road might involve walking past the liquor store or a gathering of village men. Most girls in these remote villages did not go to school. Economic margins. Vibha lived closer to the center of her village. Distance was less of a barrier for her. But Dinesh, despite his education, struggled when it came to his income. I remember in the monsoon waking up in a pool of water as the roof always leaked, Vibha reflected when we continued our conversation with her. She giggled, but it was clear that this was not a humorous memory. The laugh was more to mask the image she had just dug up of very difficult times. I noticed how she glanced over to the roof of her rebuilt home, her secure roof. I could almost feel her relief. Kacha homes are built from natural materials such as kacha roads. They are constructed using mud and then bamboo, stone, thatch, or unburnt brick. Shelter, of course, but no real protection from the elements. Roti, kapda, or makan, food, clothing, and shelter are the basic needs. But all too often on the margins, these needs fail to be met. Life for Dinesh, Vibha's father, must have been a struggle, in spite of his education and his good job as a mason. And for Mamta to feed so many mouths must have been nigh on impossible. They would have been eligible for monthly rations from the government, a bag of wheat, rice, dal, salt, oil, sugar, tea, and a few extra spices to supplement what they were growing in the field behind the house. But as her family grew, for a while, Mamta's culinary repertoire shrunk to an all time low. The year Arati, Vibha's youngest sibling, was born, Mamta had 9 mouths to feed. This was when 3 meals a day reduced to one, and one meal became dry roti. Vibha's oldest sister would often go to work with Dinesh and help out at the building site, earning a little more to help Mamta put food on the table. but finances were always a struggle. I remember times when we didn't eat vegetables for weeks, she told us. Things were very difficult. They even had to share clothes. Vibha recalled this with that same nervous laugh. 2 pairs of chaddis for 7 children. We were a large family, which didn't help our financial condition. And then there were the loans. We were always having to pay back loans. They never took a loan from the bank, Vibha explained. It was always from someone in the village, and the interest payments took a further toll on the monthly finances. One of her younger sisters had very poor health, and Dinesh had to constantly borrow money here and there for her medical treatment. This is what economic marginalization really means. Poverty contributes in a big way to girls being out of. Sneha, please turn the page out of school. It leads parents to prioritize a boy's education over a girl's. There is a belief that boys will work, contribute to household income, and look after parents in their old age. Hence, they get to go to school. Sons are educated to earn, daughters are not. The consequence of poverty is a girl missing school or a girl required to work out of the home, like Vibha's sisters who helped Dinesh on the construction site, or a girl required to work inside the home, helping with household work to enable both parents to go and earn. Living on the margins all too often means living in poverty. And in India today, we still have an estimated 370 million people living in this level of poverty. That is roughly a quarter of our population. When you're home to 1/6 of humanity, when indeed you are the largest nation in the world, when we sneaked past China, that is a sizable chunk of the entire world's people who exist below the poverty line. 5 out of every 6 of the world's poor live in sub Saharan Africa or South Asia, and despite a rapid decline in these figures in India, it is still the single country that is home to the majority at approximately 21%. But what is economic marginalization? What does it mean to the poor? To be poor. When I think back to some of the darkest days of my childhood in Delhi, I knew what it meant to be. The shame of telling my classmates at school that I only ever ate khichdi when we were supposed to be having a discussion about our family's cultural heritage and our favorite dishes. My classmates talked about biryani and butter chicken, idli, sambar, puris, amras, and paneer. But we ate khichdi every day with an occasional squeeze of lemon or teaspoon of dalda vanaspati. My mother cooked on a small electric coil cooking heater. And when there was no electricity, which was often, she would battle with the kerosene pressure stove, which had an intricate and complex choreography to be lit. It was a time consuming and very frustrating process. I lived in eternal fear of the kerosene pump stove exploding and never went near it. There are, of course, the official definitions of poverty. When the government agent knocks on your door and paints the BPL, below poverty line number, on your wall, this means that each member of the household has a daily income per day of less than 150 rupees and spends less than 27 rupees. But poverty data is severely lacking since the 2021 census was not carried out, and revisions to this have still not been made in the light of potential advances over the past 14 years. The poverty I experienced cannot begin to be compared to this, I admit. But still, I felt it. I still felt poor. And when we first met Vibha back in 2008, she felt poor too. Poverty forces families to work and make choices. And these choices involve deciding who goes to work, who stays at home and allows both parents to work, and who goes to school. Poverty sometimes means that no children in a family get to go to school. But invariably, if there is a choice, it is the boys who go. Girls stay at home and work. Social margins. The Indian caste system is an added, unpalatable, but persistent determinant in this lottery of life. If you live near the crossroads, you're likely to belong to a higher caste and essentially to have more privilege. This means you live close to public services and have access to government schemes. If you belong to a lower caste, you likely live up and over the hill or across the river. And the further you get away from the main road, from the school or the temple, the further you are from the right side of the river, the deeper you fall into the social margins, not just the physical. This is not about whether you are a stonemason, whether you work on the McGregor scheme, or whether you work at all. This is also fundamentally about who you are. 5 of every 6 people in India living in multi-dimensional poverty live in a scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, or other backward caste headed household. From the very beginning of our work in Pali, we knew that we needed to ask the right questions and gather the right data. And even at this early stage, we were seeing patterns. 95% of out of school girls we found in 2007 were from families categorized as OBC, ST, or SC. The equalization of opportunity through education has not yet been fully realized for any of these communities. And it is not just caste. Your religion can also mean you are on the social margins. Muslims in India, for example, are often described as a hidden underclass. They have the lowest asset and consumption levels among all the religions. A community particularly vulnerable to exclusion is the Gadulia Lohar community living along the train tracks in Falna. A nomadic community, they were originally Rajput ironsmiths and in Rajasthan are today categorized as MBC, members of the most backward classes. They struggled living in rented dwellings, often made partly from their bullock carts, gadulia, meaning cart. They led such a different life in their temporary homes that sadly became far from temporary. This particular group in Falna had failed to move from beside the rail tracks for years. Sheltering beneath canvas, they oftentimes missed out on schemes, missed out on being counted, and missed out on any welfare, including rations and work. School isn't a place for people like us was a statement we got used to hearing. The social dynamics of a village were always very clear. Who lives where? Which community lives where? Who can use the water pump when? This was all common knowledge. In cities too, housing societies had categories. I lived in a large part of my childhood in DDA, Delhi Development Authority colonies. The homes the government built were demarcated clearly along its hierarchy. You had HIG flats, you had HIG uh, flats for the high income group, MIG flats for the middle income group, and LIG flats for the low income group. Below these clearly demarcated homes were the most backward class of government housing, the one-room Janta flats. These were small single rooms with a bathroom and toilet. Families either cooked in the room itself or, like my mother, in the narrow corridor that connected the room to the toilet and bathroom. It was in the Janta flats that I spent part of my growing up and was so well aware of my status and position in the world. Even as a child, just as I did, people knew their place, and that place was both physical and social. Names that reveal a mindset. Distance to school, poverty, and caste affect both boys and girls. And yes, boys are also out of school. But why is it that only 49% of countries have reached gender parity in primary education? At the lower and the upper secondary levels, the gap is even wider, with only 42% and a staggering 24% of countries respectively having achieved gender parity in their education systems. And why? Well, this is essentially because below class, caste, and in other contexts, race comes gender. Being a woman and a girl amplifies the negative impacts of all the other contributing factors. These names embody the way gender multiplies disadvantage. They mark girls as lesser, undeserving, and expendable. It is the intimate, everyday violence of being named as though your life does not matter. Here are some of them. Achuki, arrived. Na, Nakushi, unwanted. Faltu, useless. Manbhari, heavy heart. Mafi, sorry. Dhapu, fed up. Naraz, angry. Galla, stop. Antimbala, last one. I don't really review our out of school girl list in such great detail. Over the years, they have become digitized, and I see the dashboard, the summary data, the numbers. The field teams see the faces. It is they who hear the names, but curiosity got the better of me. I had recently met a little girl called Mafi, meaning sorry, daughter of Hemlal and Lalita. A little girl, and yet her parents' apology. So when I got back to the Mumbai office, I asked the data team to run some lists for me. After a while, the words and letters just started to swim in front of my eyes as I couldn't quite believe what I was reading. The spreadsheet started off as I read from left to right: state Rajasthan, district Banswara, block Ghatol, village, then a code, a survey date, parents' names. Everything seemed normal, and then the same girls' names over and over and over again. As I read, my eyes moved from village to village, household number to household number, but the girls' names remained the same. Mafi, line after line, Mafi, Mafi, Mafi. Sorry, sorry, sorry. I just kept on scrolling, clenching the computer mouse in my hand until the spreadsheet went empty again. I let out a sigh, and the repetition stopped. But my eyes welled up, my vision of the spreadsheet got distorted, and the tears began. How many girls have we found with that name? I asked our impact manager, Akhil. How many Mafis are there? I hesitated to ask as I wasn't sure I really wanted to know. 405, Akhil responded. His tone was flat, like he was himself apologizing for that number. According to these lists, we found 405 girls called Mafi, which means sorry, 566 girls called Naraz, which means angry, 1,516 girls, a staggering 1,516 girls called Dhapu, meaning fed up, and 233 girls called Antimbala, which means the last girl. In India, we think deeply about our names. The naming convention includes a given name and then a secondary name that might be a surname or a patronym, perhaps a reference to a child's native village, a parent's occupation or caste. Given names are decided upon with a lot of thought. They all have meanings, and that is why the above list leaves me cold. What must the prevailing emotion be when you call your girl useless or unwanted? When I think about every one of those girls, every one of those parents weighed down by anger, frustration, and disappointment at having a girl, my resolve is hardened. My mission is set. And these names reveal a mindset. From the day these girls enter the world, they are considered a burden. They are held back by a mindset that keeps them out of school, denies them an education, and sets them on a narrow pathway that leads to marriage and motherhood, almost completely missing out on anything that could remotely be described as a childhood. And their names reflect the story. A girl arrives unwanted. Her parents see her as useless. They have a heavy heart. They are sorry, fed up, even angry. They make a plea: stop, enough, and they hope she's the last girl. I came to this realization when we were ramping up our data systems. A spreadsheet had never before shocked me quite so much, but this one did. And from then on, I became more and more intrigued by the link between a name and a mindset. Every time I went into the field, I wanted to know more about the girls and their parents' choice of names. Sometimes, the more you're aware of something, the more you see it, even if you aren't looking, and this is exactly what happened. Stories just kept appearing for me in the newspaper, online, through well respected media houses like Zubair Ahmed's BBC story that I found. As per the story, 285 girls were found in the district of Satara in Maharashtra who had all been called Nakusha, which means unwanted. The story had a positive ending in a way, as Zubair was reporting on a government led ceremony to rename all the girls. They had now been allowed to choose new names like Kiran, meaning ray of light, or Ashmita, meaning very tough. But in this relatively sparsely populated district that is home to the popular hill station of Mahabaleshwar, as well as a handful of spectacular forts, it shocked me that so many girls, from babies right up to 20-year-old women, were carrying this bleak, hurtful name, unwanted. The names became stranger the more I read. One girl I read about in the newspaper more recently had been named Missed Call, as her father Bharat said, Antima is my second daughter, as we wished her to be the last daughter. But then we had a third daughter. We called her Missed Call because we missed out on a boy. Their fourth child was a boy. But just think about what those girls must feel to have such negative names, and their brother celebrated so much more. A mechanic I learned in the northeast of India called his sons first gear and second gear, and his daughter reverse. These girls' names kept going round and round in my head, and I couldn't stop thinking what it must really feel like when you're driven to choose such a name. And then, if the girls themselves feel sad or embarrassed, I wondered. No, there are many girls in my school with such names. It is normal, one girl interviewed for an article explained. Her name was Guarantee, as in please God, guarantee as a boy next. Having had conversations with so many families over the years, it dawned on me how hard it must be to escape the mindset that a goat is an asset and a girl is a liability. We are back to Dinesh's animal analogy again. In many village communities, families articulate their wealth through the number of goats they own. In the village, your wealth is made visible through the size of your herd. That's how you garner respect. Goats are the prized asset, sometimes even a source of envy. The opposite is true for girls. Girls are not an asset, girls are a liability, a source of pity across the village. We shall stop here. It is almost, it's just 1 minute to go. So we've read some horrifying facts, and I'm sure it's going to rattle, or it has rattled all of us already. And I can see by the names of our participants here that most of us here are also girls, young or not so young, and it really hits us harder to see what girls are going through in many parts of this country. So let's think about this, and then next week we shall get back to
Pushpita has
reading
raised
again.
her hand.
Yes, Neha?
And Pushpita has raised her hand.
Yes, Pushpita, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening once
Good
again
evening.
to
Yeah.
everyone. Ma'am, this reminded me especially this thing about the names. And
Yeah.
here we are talking about rural Rajasthan and these pockets, but I heard from my grandmother when she
Hmm.
was young, she told us that, and it was so prevalent in Bengal also in those
Yes.
days. Like
Yes.
when they had daughters, they would name them like this. And she said, like, one was Oporna, one was Jhorna, and then it was
Yeah.
so
Arna. I mean,
no
not
more,
anymore.
not anymore.
Yeah,
So
I believe that they had names even like Riti or Giti and Iti. Iti means that's
matlab,
it, full stop.
that's at the end. So
Yeah.
that was really, I mean, even in those days, even in cities, it was like it was she also felt that that
Yeah.
this discrimination that was practiced, even though it was.
Even though there is so called education.
And she was from like a very well off
Yeah.
landlord kind of family, so
Right.
she found it very disturbing, so she used to tell us these things. So this brought
Yeah,
it back
that's
to
the
my.
sad reality of our country. And I don't think it's just here. I'm sure there is this kind of a discrimination in many parts of the world. Probably we don't know much about it. We know what is prevalent in our own places. So yeah,
Yes.
I suppose an initiative like Educate Girls is the answer to all this, and hope that many more such initiatives happen and that some sense is dinned into their heads.
Yes, ma'am, very.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you for attending the session. And if you have anything, you are most welcome to write to me or send us a message. It'll be lovely to hear from any one of you. Thank you and good evening to everyone. Bye bye. We shall
Thank
meet
you,
again.
Brenda. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, sir.
Bye bye.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.